universal mail-in voting is going to be catastrophic. It's going to make our country a laughingstock all over the world.
So one critical difference in this election as opposed to the previous ones is there's a great emphasis on mail-in voting as opposed to in-person voting. Normally and mostly, people would go to the ballot box, would go to the polling booth, stand in line, and then cast their vote. Whereas this year, because of the coronavirus and because of concerns around the coronavirus, people don't want to be, out, and they don't want to be seen in long queues. A lot of people seem to be preferring what is called mail-in voting as opposed to in-person voting. Even in the last election in 2016, 1 out of 4 votes that was cast was actually mail-in. Now, in the mail-in itself, there are different categories. You have the mail-in voting that can happen by post, which is called the postal ballot. Now, how that works is that a registered voter will receive a ballot at their address about 3 to 6 weeks before the election. They'll then have to fill that up, they'll have to sign it, they'll have to mail it back, ideally about a week or so before election day. There are also ballot boxes that are left in community centers, in libraries, in other public places where you can fill up your form and then put it in that box, and then it'll be cleared by the authorities. Every state has different rules when it comes to mail-in voting. Now, for example, there are many states across the US where mail-in voting for the November 3rd election has already begun. People are already filling up their forms and sending it back to the election authorities. This time around, there's been a controversy with Donald Trump saying that postal ballots are going to be suspect because there is the possibility of fraud, there is the possibility of a foreign power using its influence to try and hack the elections.
But thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win. I won't stand for it.
Is there any merit to that argument? Well, various studies have shown that mail-in voting has been relatively safe. In fact, a study done in the state of Oregon found that only 14 cases of attempted mail fraud happened in almost 20 years of mail-in voting. So why then is Trump crying hoarse? Trump feels that his supporters, his base, are more prone to voting in person, whereas the Democrats feel that more of their base would vote by mail.
Vote, vote, vote. If you're able to vote early in your state, vote early. If you're able to vote in person, vote in person. Vote whatever way is the best way for you, because he cannot stop you from being able to determine the outcome of this election.
Now, the reason for that is the coronavirus. Trump has repeatedly over the last 6 months denounced the virus.
A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Denounced the science behind the virus.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
Denounced, even wearing masks.
I think wearing a face mask as I greet presidents, prime ministers, dictators, kings, queens, I don't know, somehow I don't see it for myself.
Trump recently withheld a $25 billion fund to the US Postal Service, saying that he believes postal balloting would lead to greater fraud. Now, here's the interesting thing. USPS, which is the US Postal Service, is something that all Americans, long before your e-commerce sites and your Amazons of the world came in, it's USPS that they used to depend on for mailing services. This time around, because of the coronavirus, there have been complaints of people not even receiving essential items like medicines that were posted. So there is a lot of pressure on the Postal Service. There's also a feeling, and the Democrats have openly expressed this, that the Postmaster General, Mr. DeJoy, to quote the Democrats, is a Trump crony. And therefore, Trump is trying to use Mr. DeJoy to ensure that as minimal people as possible get to do postal balloting. Then, of course, there is the interesting question of will Trump actually concede if he were to lose on election night, or even vice versa. If the Democrat side were to lose on election night, will they concede, or will they have to wait for all the mailed-in ballots to be counted? Now, here's the interesting thing. Last election in 2016, 1 in 4 voted by mail. This time, because of the coronavirus, they're expecting that to go up to 1 in 2. So if 50% of the ballots have not been counted on election night because physically counting ballots is a much lengthier process than counting votes that have been cast in an electronic machine. So then if 50% of the vote is still out, can you even declare, can you even project that X or Y is going to be the next US president based on the states that the said person is carrying? So expect a long and messy affair, much like what we had in 2000, where the vote in Florida was disputed. Eventually it went up to the Supreme Court, and it was only after a month that we actually knew who won Florida and thereby who won the US presidency. So this time too, the feeling among pundits is you might not get to know on election night who the actual winner of this election is, whether it is Trump or Biden. It could very well go all the way up to the Supreme Court to finally adjudicate on this matter. And that's why Trump is really pushing his nominee, Amy Barrett, to take the next seat on the Supreme Court with the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that's why ultimately the feeling is that this might not be an election, a straight election like we saw in 2016 or in 2008. This might be a messy election, an election whose result will not be known on election night and ultimately will be settled in the courts.